Welcome everyone. Welcome to another CAG meeting tonight. Tonight's going to be possibly a short meeting. We're going to be doing a introduction to EPA's new, well, it's not new, but revamped EJ screening tool. But before we hop onto that, we're going to have a little announcement with Sarah. Sarah's going to speak here real quick.
Okay. Hi, everybody. We are here in the new River Education Center at Green Anchors. Since the last meeting that Laura and Michael were here, the walls are painted. We have some maps and pictures. Doug Larson laid a beautiful floor. So we are making progress and hope to welcome people here sometimes. What's coming up is the Voices of the Lower Willamette exhibit is currently at Lloyd Center, bottom floor near the ice skating rink and near Nordstrom's, where Nordstrom's used to be. It looks great there. It's every place we've had it has been different, but this is exciting. And December 3rd, the Saturday afternoon, we are going to have some music there. So go to Lloyd Center, support them. They're going to have lots of local pop-up shops this season. So go to Lloyd Center, walk around, see our exhibit, and December 3rd in the afternoon, come hear some music. If you are a musician, let me know and we'll try to get you into the lineup. The other thing we have in the chat is there's a group called Scrub the Hub, and they're doing a series of forums. And in the hub, you'll see there's an upcoming forum that's going to be in person in Southwest Portland. So they're going to have a series of these. So this is the next one. It's in the chat. They have a great lineup of speakers looking at all kinds of issues related to the Lower Willamette. So those are my announcements.
Yeah, and we'll send out some reminders and updates for these couple events as well. We also will be having the collaborative in December. So December 7th. So we will we'll be sending out an announcement for that for December. So we won't have our typical CAG meeting like we have. So there'll be the collaborative, and we'll also provide some information too on what's happening at the Lloyd Center. And yeah, check out the exhibit. If you didn't catch it at City Hall, do try to make this one. It's going to be pretty cool. It is pretty cool. So, but without any further ado, we're going to introduce Emily Batalik to actually introduce us to EPA's EJ screening tool. And at the end of this too, we will be talking about an opportunity to do this again. If you think this tool is really valuable and you know others who would be interested in seeing and being a part of this, we'll be doing it again tomorrow at the BES Water Quality Lab near Cathedral Park. So, so stay tuned for that at the end of Emily's talk. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Emily.
Hey everyone, before we pass it over to Emily, I just wanted to quickly say hello and just mention, I think I know everyone here, but I'm Laura Knudsen. I'm the EPA Community Involvement Coordinator for Portland Harbor. And Emily is here tonight, and I'll let her introduce herself in a moment, but she's an EPA Environmental Justice Coordinator. And the reason why we have her here is because many reasons, but because in the Portland Harbor Community Involvement Plan, one of the pieces of that plan that came out and was redone in August of 2020 is an action plan. And one of the pieces of that action plan is environmental justice actions that EPA is committed to. And one of those is to provide training on this really powerful tool that Emily's going to go over tonight, our environmental justice screening tool, or EJ Screen, to community members and to tribal representatives and tribal members and performing parties, potentially responsible parties, and others who are interested in using the tools. So I just wanted to mention that tie in connection to tonight's presentation. So thank you all. And with that, I will stop talking and give it to Emily.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Emily Batalock. So as Laura mentioned, I'm an environmental justice coordinator for EPA Region 10. A little bit of my background. I got my degree in biosystems engineering from Clemson University. And then I spent some time in the Philippines as a Peace Corps volunteer. I was there for about 3 years doing coastal resource management with fishing communities. So a lot of education with fishing communities there. And I've been with the EPA about 3 years. I started in the New York office where I was doing inspections for underground storage tanks. And then I moved out to the Seattle office where now I do environmental justice work. So thank you everyone for letting me be here today to share this tool with you. I think it's really exciting. And yeah, I'm gonna do a little bit of an overview of what is environmental justice in case you guys aren't too familiar with how EPA defines environmental justice. And then I'll talk about some of the EJ grant funding opportunities we have, and then I'll kind of dive into the tool. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can you guys see that? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna.
And there's a few things I want
with. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to start with a video on identifying communities with environmental justice concerns, kind of before I dive into my presentation.
to share about some of the basic terms and the ways that we refer to communities in the environmental justice program that I want to share with everyone. There's so many folks working on EJ, asking questions about EJ, trying to figure out how to integrate environmental justice into all of our programs, policies, and activities right now. It's really important that we understand and use these terms consistently and knowing why there's some differences in what we do. One of the things that's really important are just a couple of the standard ways that we refer to communities with EJ concerns. One of them is people of color, low income, and indigenous communities. And it's really important to hit all three of those terms when you're referring to communities in this way. This goes back to the 1980s and early 1990s of the environmental justice movement. It's the way to make sure when you're talking about EJ, you're being inclusive of all the communities that the environmental justice movement defined as being part of EJ. So again, people of color, low income, and indigenous. The other way to talk about communities with EJ concerns is to say communities with EJ concerns. A lot of times folks will say EJ communities. It's a shorthand, it's easy, but it's also somewhat misleading. We don't actually define EJ communities. We don't draw borders around certain places, and we don't label them as being EJ or not EJ. Instead, we say communities with EJ concerns. And there's a reason for that. In EPA, we believe that communities define themselves. It actually, again, goes back to the beginning of the EJ through the EJ movement. One of the principal rules of environmental justice is communities speak for themselves. And as part of speaking for themselves, they define themselves. They define what their community is, they define where their community is, and they define how we should refer to their communities. Now, in some of the executive orders now, we're actually going to start to take some important steps forward where the United States government and EPA will start drawing borders around certain communities and labeling them as disadvantaged. That has been put in those executive orders with a lot of input from environmental justice leaders and communities across the United States for very specific purposes that are really exciting and really important. So if you're doing work in those places related to something like an executive order where we're going to define disadvantaged communities for EJ purposes, great. Use the tools that are going to be created to do that. Participate in the conversations related to that, but outside of those spaces, it's still really important to be careful about how we refer to or label any of the communities. So again, people of color, low income, or indigenous communities, or communities with EJ concerns are always the safest bets for those. There's a few ways that we have to actually determine which communities might have EJ concerns. One of those, of course, is just by engaging with the community. The community is always going to be your best resource for understanding how the community views itself, what sorts of concerns the community might have, and whether they think they have environmental justice issues or not. It's always the best place to start. Another way to go, though, if you can't engage directly with the community given the circumstance, is to go ask some of the staff here at EPA that have knowledge about what's going on in communities. Of course, the EJ staff that are in every region, every program, especially regions, though, that are on the front line of a lot of our relationships directly with communities, they'll be able to help you understand where are the EJ issues, what are the EJ issues, and how does the community relate to those issues. Some other staff are like the community involvement coordinators in the Superfund program, do a lot of work and have a lot of knowledge and understanding of environmental justice. There are resources there to you. Please don't fail to use them. Don't feel like you can't go and ask your colleagues about how to understand communities with EJ concerns. Another way is to do some historical or analytical research. There's a lot of demographic tools out there, a lot of historical tools, especially now where there's a lot of academic research looking into things like redlining, looking more into the treatment of indigenous peoples throughout the entire history, way before the founding of the United States. That research can help inform you about which communities might have EJ concerns and what those concerns are. And then, of course, we also have EJ Screen. EJ Screen is the nationally consistent screening tool for environmental justice that we use at EPA and that we've made available for everyone across all of the United States. Real quickly, the best way to use EJ Screen, just very basically to understand if a community has EJ concerns or not, is to look at the EJ indexes. There's 11 EJ indexes because we use 11 data sets within EJ Screen. And in the EJ indexes, we take each of those 11 data sets and we combine them individually with the people of color and low income information for every block group in the entire United States. And that gives you an EJ index. If you're looking at a community and any one of those 11 EJ indexes are at the 80th percentile or higher, that's a pretty good starting point to say, hey, there might be some EJ concerns in this community. Let's dig further. EJ Screen, though, like its name says, is just a screen. It's not giving you a yes/no answer. It's not giving it in black and white. It's giving you a lot of information, though, to start doing some research, asking better questions, pursuing a more informed investigation, or reaching out to those folks that live in that area and figuring out how they view their own community and what their issues are. Something else that's really important to understand are the differences between some of these basic terms like equality, equity, and justice. Equality, of course, is one of the bedrock principles of the United States, that all people are created equal and so are all communities. But we know that in practice that is not true. There are a lot of inequities and injustices in the United States. So equity is a term that recognizes that not are really important and that we should be doing things about that. But in equity, it's different from justice, because in equity, typically in the EJ program, what we mean is we're trying to figure out a closed gap in those inequitable situations. Some communities have been left behind. So what can we do to try to do something more for those communities so they can be brought up to the same place as everyone else? So an equity policy or an equity intervention would be like looking at a grant program and making some extra considerations in there so that the grant resources are allocated to the communities that need them the most. That would be an equity intervention. That would be doing something equitable in our policies or programs or activities. And that's really important. We have got to do things for equity to try to close those gaps. It's not everything, though. When the Office of Environmental Justice was originally founded, it was actually called the Office of Environmental Equity, and the EJ movement, which was responsible for EPA really taking up environmental justice in the early 90s, said, thank you, that's great, we love that you have an Office of Environmental Equity, but that's not what we were talking about. We were talking about justice. EPA, you need to pursue environmental justice, not just equity. Justice recognizes that there are inequitable outcomes across the United States, but there are reasons why those inequitable outcomes exist. And a lot of those reasons have to do with statutes, with policies, with decisions about things like resources throughout the entire history of the United States and way before the United States was founded. And figuring out what those reasons are for the inequity or the injustice, and then doing something about the reason, that's practicing justice. So it's different from equity, okay? Equity is trying to close the gap. Justice is about finding the reason for the gap and doing something about that reason. All right, so it's important to have both, but you've got to be able to focus on both equity and justice. And justice is really the longer term thing, right? We could do equity all day long, but if we haven't solved the justice issue, we're still going to have a gap in the future. Of course, there's a lot of resources here to help you understand these things. We have resources on the SharePoint site. We have videos from our EJ and Systemic Racism series. We're creating more videos to help folks understand the roots of environmental injustices in the United States, and a lot of other elements to try to help not just EJ program staff, but everyone across the EPA be more informed and better practitioners of environmental justice. So go to those SharePoint sites and use those resources. We also have a lot of stuff out there on how to use EJ Screen. There's a lot of training resources on the EJ Screen website, and there are people throughout all of the programs and regions that are skilled practitioners of using EJ Screen who are ready to help you understand how to do it. We would love it if everyone in the EPA understood how to use EJ Screen and understood how to use EJ Screen in their program policies, in their activities, in the implementation of EPA's regulatory endeavors. And then, of course, we also have EJ coordinators everywhere throughout the EPA. It is part of the reason why we exist, to help you. We are here to support the integration of EJ in everything that you do. Doesn't matter if you work on disaster recovery or sending out DERA grants. It doesn't matter if you're issuing pesticide permits or writing rules for the air shop. We are here to help you figure out how to do environmental justice. Please do not fail to reach out to us. Again, my name is Matthew Tejada. If you can't find your EJ coordinator, you can email or call me directly, and I will put you in touch with them. We want to help you do environmental justice so that we can advance EJ across the United States.
So
YouTube.
sorry. Yeah, that was a YouTube video. I can also share the link. Yeah, Laura will put it in the chat for everyone. That was just a very broad of what is environmental justice at EPA. No. Okay. 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 Yeah. So that video was just to kind of give you a broad overview of environmental justice and EJ Screen. So now I'm kind of going to dive into it a little more. So my plan for this evening was to just give like environmental justice 101, talk about some of those upcoming funding opportunities, and then dive into EJ Screen. So do a quick overview and then a live demonstration. And we just did this about an hour ago, so some of those CAG members can also give some reflections on the tool. And then I'll obviously take any questions that anybody has. So that was the video. Here we go. So I just want to start with how EPA defines environmental justice. So yeah, we define it as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. I know that's a big mouthful, but when we think about environmental justice, we're thinking about all of these different factors that go into it. So just wanted to give this definition for your background knowledge. So on the video where Matt Tejada was talking about the differences between equity, equality, and justice, he was using the field example with the fence and if you can remove the barrier. So this is a different example using an apple tree. And I think this picture kind of differentiates pretty well the differences in the definitions of inequality, equality, equity, and justice. So justice is really about fixing the system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. So as you can see, the tree is now upright. They both have ladders. So these are just kind of graphics to get you thinking about what is justice, like what does justice mean? So yeah, this is kind of food for thought. You can take it home, look at the different pictures later and kind of think about it a little bit more. I very briefly want to touch on the executive orders that establish EJ at EPA and across the federal government, because as you may or may not know, EJ is not a statute, it's not a law. So when we look at environmental justice, we're looking at it through the lens of executive orders. So in 1994, President Clinton signed the first executive order that had the federal government looking at environmental justice and addressing it throughout different programs. And then on President Biden's first day in office, he signed 2 additional executive orders that really revamped our interest in environmental justice. So right now, it's a very exciting time for EJ. We're growing a lot as a team, and we're really trying to reinvent the wheel on how we incorporate environmental justice into our work. And then the last executive order that President Biden also signed is talking about the climate crisis and environmental justice. So this established Justice 40. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it, but this is what Matt Tejada was talking about in the video a little bit about disadvantaged communities and spending 40% of all federal funds on those communities. So this is a new approach to the way that government's doing things, and it's kind of all forthcoming. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Also, very exciting time at EPA. Last month, we just announced a new national program for environmental justice in the Office of External Civil Rights. So now amongst EPA, we kind of sit at the same level as the air program, the water program, the CERCLA program. So we're gonna have more influence on our EPA programs. So here's a picture of the administrator announcing the launch of this office. So this just happened a month ago. So again, everything's forthcoming, we're growing, and we're gonna have 200 new full-time employees dedicated to environmental justice at EPA. To give some context, in Region 10, right now we have 4 staff and we're going to 12 staff. So it's an exciting time for environmental justice. So when we look at communities with EJ concerns, we recognize that there are so many different factors going on in those communities. It's not just about the environment, it's about social factors, economic factors, access to information, access to public participation. So when we talk about communities with environmental justice concerns, we're looking at all of these different factors and how they overlap. And we're considering all of this, as well as systemic racism and disinvestment in certain communities. So typically, there's a very, as you can see from the picture, like a complex web of things going on. So typically, there's not just one issue going on in a community with environmental justice concerns. So we just like to kind of be aware of that. Yeah. Okay. So what does EPA do with environmental justice? So we have 3 kind of separate buckets that we're working on to integrate environmental justice. So the first one is to support EJ integration internally at EPA. So again, that kind of means us as EJ coordinators working with different areas of the EPA to make sure that they're considering environmental justice in their daily jobs. The second bucket is engaging with external stakeholders and partners. So this is working with like our local governments and our state governments to see how they're incorporating environmental justice into their work. And then the third bucket is supporting and engaging with communities with environmental justice concerns. So in this sense, it could be doing things like technical assistance, or providing that grant funding, or doing trainings like this. So we kind of have 3 different buckets that our work falls into. And again, all of this is growing as we have more staff, but that's kind of how we segregate our work at this time. So I very briefly wanted to talk about EJ funding opportunities, if this is if grants are something that you're interested in applying to, because we do have a few coming up. So I'll very briefly mention on this Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers. So this is a new program. We call it TICTAC because we love acronyms at EPA. So the request for applicants closed on November 1st for this, but I bring this up because the concept here is that these technical assistance centers are going to be available to community centers like you. When they're set up, you can tap into them for resources. So some of the things that they'll provide assistance on is like training and applying for, as well as managing grants. So let's say you don't know how to apply for a grant, you can go to this technical assistance center and they're going to kind of help you walk through that. Other things like community collaboration, facilitation, community engagement, and then energy justice activities. So related to clean energy, because obviously climate change and environmental justice are so intertwined. So those are just some of the examples of resources that hopefully by spring will kind of be set up for you to be able to tap into. So as more information comes out, EPA will continue to inform communities about where the technical assistance centers are going to be located. For another grant funding opportunity that's coming up is called the EJ Government to Government Program. If you're familiar with EJ grants, this was previously known as the State Environmental Justice Collaborative Agreements. Again, we have a lot of acronyms, so I apologize. But this request for applicants is anticipated to come out this month. And these are going to be $1 million awards with a 3 to 5 year project period. So that means you'd have 3 to 5 years to spend $1 million, and you don't have to apply for the full $1 million. You can apply for you can apply for less. This is a historic amount of funding for the EJ program. Typically, we've never had this much funding to give out. So like I said, it's a very exciting time for environmental justice. For these government to government grants, states, local governments, and tribes, U.S. territories and freely associated states are eligible to apply. And then there's some new features that the grant funding can cover. It's always been able to cover training and education and outreach, but now the funding can also fund small construction, installations, and mitigation. We're also kind of focusing on projects in rural areas and projects that are conducting health impact assessments. I just also want to caveat that, until the request for applicants comes out, all of this could change because we're kind of in flex right now, and this will be coming out of headquarters, but we do anticipate this to come out before November. And very similarly to the government grants, we have our collaborative problem-solving cooperative agreements. So these are pretty much the same, except other organizations can apply. So these are open to nonprofit organizations. And these are $500,000 awards for 3 to 5 year projects. Some of the things that these grants can focus on are climate disaster and resiliency programs or emergency preparedness. Again, the health impact assessments and projects in rural areas. If your project does not cover one of those things, that's okay. That's not the only thing we're funding. That's just, some new ideas that have kind of come out in the last year. The final funding opportunity that we have coming up, and this is also a new program, is called the Pass-Through Fund the Funder program. So this is typically going to be for larger entities who are able to kind of remove EPA from the process. So they're going to receive a large grant, and then they're going to run their own request for applicants for smaller organizations to be able to get federal funding without having to deal with the federal government. Because we've heard in the past, we've gotten some feedback that, you know, sometimes it's a major barrier in applying to grants, is that our grants typically have way more administration tasks tied to them. So it can be intimidating. So that's the new concept here. So the request for applicants for that larger funder is anticipated this winter, and then the smaller grants would come out probably in the summer. As you can see, they're having on November 22nd and December 13th more information about this specific program because it is new. So the link is in here when you get this presentation if you're interested in that. I know I just threw a lot of information about the grants. I'll pause if anyone has any questions.
Is this PowerPoint available for download?
Yeah, I can share it. Right.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nothing in the chat. Okay, so now I'm kind of going to dive into the meat of this presentation, which is all about the environmental justice screening tool for EJ Screen. So for this part of the training, I'm going to give you an introduction to what is EJ Screen, talk about some of the data that you can find in EJ Screen. There's different maps, tools involved in the screen, how different users are utilizing this website. And then I'm going to do a live demonstration of the tool to kind of give you a taste of everything that's available. I feel like this tool is pretty user friendly. It definitely has multiple like functions that if you are GIS savvy, you can kind of tap into, and I can kind of discuss those later as well. So first of all, what is EJ Screen? This is EPA's GIS tool for nationally consistent data. So that means that, you know, we don't include data in here that we don't have data for the entire country. So some states have kind of developed their own EJ Screen mapping tools using state data. So those can kind of fill in some of the gaps that EJ Screen doesn't have, because again, we're looking at nationally consistent data. And what the tool does is it combines environmental and socioeconomic data to highlight areas where EJ concerns may exist. And it's kind of like EPA's starting point for when we're doing a project, like, is it in an area with potential EJ concerns? We kind of start with EJ Screen. So yeah, it's a starting point. It's not an end point, if that makes sense. So some of the key features in EJ Screen, every year we update the environmental data, and there's websites and information, technical documentation where you can see where all of the data is coming from. We also update the demographics. It pulls from the most recent US Census Bureau and the American Community Survey, or ACS. So right now we have the 2016 to 2020 ACS in there, and then the 2010 census group. I'm not sure when 2020 is added. I'm hoping that happens soon. So this uses the highest resolution data available. You can download the data, and it kind of, yeah, so you can download and save the sessions for a later time. You can download a PDF of your report. So there's a way to save what you're working on, which is a nice feature. So there's a few different data sets in EJ Screen. When Matt was talking, he was mentioning that we had 11 environmental indicators. We now have 12 because this is the new version. So we have 12 EJ indices, which are looking at that environmental data with the demographic information. New to EJ Screen, this just got updated about a month ago, is supplemental indices. And this is similar to an EJ index, but it's looking at additional demographic information that the EJ index isn't looking at. So it's just another way to kind of encompass some of the data that you're looking at. And then there's the environmental indicators by themselves. So those don't include any of the demographic information. The demographic information can also be separated by itself. There's some health indicators, some climate change indicators, and some critical service gaps. So there's a lot of information in EJ Screen. I know it can be kind of overwhelming. I'm hoping when I get into the live demo, it'll be a little easier to understand. But yeah, this is just to kind of give you some context on everything that's included in the tool. As I mentioned, a new version of EJ Screen just came out about a month ago. So previously we didn't have data on some of our US territories. Now we do. Those supplemental indexes are new. There's also some threshold mapping for more advanced GIS users. We updated the demographic and environmental data. Like I said, we kind of try to do that annually. And then we changed how we're calculating our EJ indices. Previously, we were including population in those calculations, and we kind of removed that because it was skewing the data in rural areas. So now there's no population consideration in our calculations. And that kind of, all of the calculation data can be found in our technical documentation. If you're really looking to dive in, that's kind of an option there. I also really like to caveat the tool because it's just a screening tool. It's not the end all be all to environmental justice. It's only looking at 12 environmental indicators. Obviously, there are other environmental indicators you can look at. There's other demographic information you can look at. You know, depending on how you use the tool, it might change the data that you're using. So we always recommend confirming with community members, getting on the ground and getting that localized knowledge and data that you can't get from a nationally consistent screening tool. The census data has limitations, and it, like I mentioned, it can also kind of obscure those small rural communities. So yeah, EJ Screen does not label EJ communities. As Matt Tejada said, that is not something at EPA that we do. We typically say like communities with EJ concerns because a community should be able to identify how they want. It's not EPA's role to tell a community how they should identify. So we typically do not say EJ communities. So yeah, just some limitations on the tool just to preface all of this. So I've kind of started talking about some of the data in EJ Screen. So I'll kind of dive into a little bit more of the specifics now. So these are kind of the different ways to measure communities. So a block is the smallest possible, I guess, way we can measure community. There's block groups, and this is kind of what we focus on in EJ Screen. So it's a collection of residential blocks, and typically the population size in these blocks is between 600 and 3,000 people. So you'll notice in rural areas, sometimes a block group will be really large, and in urban areas, it'll be a really small geographic area. And that's to kind of keep that population size consistent amongst a block group. Then going up, we have consensus tracts, counties, states, and then finally the nation. So EJ Screen will compare data to a state or the nation. You kind of have the option to select which one you want to compare to. I typically compare to the state just because it gives you a little more localized knowledge on that area instead of comparing to the entire nation. So as I mentioned, we have 12 environmental indicators in EJ Screen. So this is just kind of a list of them. And again, if you want information on where the data is coming from, we can navigate there through the tool. So we're looking at particulate matter 2.5, ozone, diesel particulate matter, air toxics cancer risk, air toxics respiratory hazard index, traffic proximity and volume. And on the right side of this slide, you can see what year that data has been updated. So as you can see, it's not always updated annually, but anytime we have a new data set, we will update it in EJ Screen. And here are the other environmental indicators. So we have lead paint, and this one is kind of looking at houses that were built before 1960. It doesn't mean that there's lead paint in all those houses, but it's an indicator of potential lead hazards. So that's kind of how we're looking at that. We look at how close an area is to Superfund sites or to risk management plan facility sites, hazardous waste proximity, underground storage tanks in that area, and then wastewater discharge indicators. So you can see some like the Superfund information's just been updated this year. So that's kind of some of the most up-to-date information we have. And then, as I mentioned, we also have those socioeconomic indicators. So we have 7 of these. So we look at people of color, low income, limited English speaking, less than high school education. And then we also look at population under the age of 5 and over the age of 64, because sometimes people in these age groups are more susceptible to environmental risk. So we just kind of like to consider that when we're talking about demographic information. So I was kind of talking about an EJ index is going to look at that environmental indicator with the demographic data. When we talk about demographic data in an EJ index, we're looking at low income and people of color. So when we look on the tool at the EJ indexes, it's combining those 2 things. And this calculation at the bottom is just kind of giving you a broad overview of how it's doing that. You're not expected to use this calculation at any time. The tool is doing that for you. But this is just so you can see where the data is kind of coming from. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm just waiting for my slides to catch up. We're going. Okay. So then I mentioned we have 3 health indicators in the tool. All of this information is coming from CDC. So in EJ Screen, you can look at areas with low life expectancy, heart disease, and asthma. We also have climate change indicators. So you can look at wildfire risk, flood risk, drought, coastal flood hazard, 100-year flood estimates, and sea level rise. You know, a lot of times communities with EJ concerns are more susceptible to climate change. So you're able to kind of map these and see some of the areas that are more at risk to these. And then we also have critical service indicators. So there's food deserts, medically underserved, and broadband internet. And again, like if you want information on like how they're calculating all of these things, there's more information on the EJ Screen website. So for example, for a food desert, it's like proximity to like to grocery stores, and like in urban areas versus rural areas, they'll consider different things. The other thing that I really want to talk about is that results are ranked as percentiles. So percentiles kind of put indicators into common units of 0 to 100, because like, for example, when we're looking at ozone, we're talking in parts per billion, and it's really hard to compare 1 parts per billion to like, you know, the number of underground storage tanks in an area. So that's why we kind of convert everything to percentiles. So we're comparing to the state or the nation. So a place at the 80th percentile means that only 20% more of the United States population has a higher value. Like I said, percentiles can be a little confusing, but the purpose is to be able to compare it to something else. I also just want to add that with percentiles, somebody always has to be at the top and somebody always has to be at the bottom. So just because you're in a 95th percentile doesn't necessarily mean that you know, it's super hazardous. Like even if we cleaned up all of the air pollution today, someone's still going to be in the 95th percentile of, you know, most polluted air. So that's just something to keep in mind when we get into the tool and you're kind of seeing different things, that this is all relative and compared to either the nation or the state. Does anyone have questions on percentiles? I know it's a little confusing. Yes, Scott.
Hi. So do you have some type of indicator, like if I were looking at this, and let's say we were looking at lead paint and we were comparing different states, is there a line that says, like, could you draw a line through a percentile saying that this is what we consider generally to be safe, or this is unsafe, or this is the band of uncertainty?
Yeah, so typically when we get into EJ Screen, you can look at those pollution and environmental indicators separately, and it's going to give you the value. So like for PM 2.5, I think it displays in parts per billion. So it's going to give you the state average value and then compare your area that you've selected to that state average. I guess it's not going to give you exactly what you're asking of, like, where is the line of what is healthy and unhealthy. I think you can find that information on the EPA website, but it's not integrated into EJ Screen, if that makes sense.
Okay, I see.
Did that answer your question, Scott?
Well, yeah, it makes me just, of course, this is quite an advancement, but it makes me feel that this has got a long ways to go before it becomes highly useful.
Yeah, no, you know what, EJ Screen, we're taking public feedback on the tool constantly, so I can provide that feedback as well to the people that develop this tool, because I think that that is a really good point. When you're looking at those technical numbers, it's helpful to know, what is the threshold. So.
Right, and another thought occurred to me since you're talking about feedback, is that this tool looks like it's something that if you were maybe you were doing a senior project and for your bachelor's degree or a master's degree or even a PhD, that the ability to use the data with some facility would seem to be very important. I wonder if you guys have considered reaching out to universities and have them help you with case studies, because the master's degrees are going to be really helpful. How they use the data, they have to justify it. They've got a panel of people. PhD does the same thing, that are going to review their, and that will give you some insight into how useful the data currently is, what other data sources they might be using, maybe even federal databases that you wouldn't even have considered have overlap with yours.
Yeah, no, I think that's great feedback. We have seen some universities using this tool already. And as I mentioned, some states also have their own EJ mapping tools. So like the state of Washington, I've seen University of Washington students kind of use EJ Screen and the Washington Health Disparities Map and looking at that data. So I think that's good feedback as well. Thank you, Scott. Okay, any other questions before I move on? So Scott, this actually kind of gets into what you were just asking. This is a little breakdown of who is currently using EJ Screen. As you can see, universities aren't even on here, so maybe that's something we should be looking at a little bit. But yeah, some of the different uses of EJ Screen are to conduct environmental justice analysis, to do community outreach, to identify like priority areas, to do some reporting, some environmental analysis, education and teaching, and then research. So I think that, yeah, universities would really benefit from utilizing this tool, and that's maybe a training area that we should look into, conducting this a little bit more. As we get out more in the community and kind of share what is EJ Screen, we kind of hope that some of these numbers will jump around, but kind of right now, this is the breakdown of who is using EJ Screen. So it is a pretty varied use, which is good to see. One other thing I'll add before I dive into the live demo is there are a lot of EJ Screen resources out there. I am now one of them. I'm going to give you my email address so you're able to contact me. But our national office also does, every other month they do public office hours. So if you ever have a question or you want to just hear other people's questions on the tool, they post it on their website. So the next one's going to be on December 21st. These times are in Eastern time. I should have switched them, apologies. So 9 a.m. Eastern time. And then, as I mentioned, this new version of EJ Screen just came out about a month ago. So they're still doing training on how to use EJ Screen 2.1. So if you wanted to, take another dive at it, you could attend this training on November 16th. But in between those times, if you have any questions on the tool, you can reach out to me directly as well. Here's my email address. So when we share the presentation, you'll have it. So yeah, now I'm going to do a live demonstration. I think while I pull it up, do members of the CAG want to share any reflections from what they learned in the last session?
You want to go?
You can start.
Okay. So I guess I think it's a great tool. You know, yes, it needs you know, like any tool, you know, it could take some improvement, but I guess one of the things that we talked about was just, you know, knowing that this is a well, it's great for us to be able to use it in a way to like just gain more information and data about our local community. So, you know, like pinpointing down like the, you know, for like, you know, what's the data around a particular school, or, you know, or a block within Portland and North Portland, or next to the river. So the tool is really powerful in using it that way. But you know, as Emily had mentioned earlier, we have to always keep in mind that it is a tool, and data is, you know, subjective. So you want to do your homework. You know, it's someone else's narrative. So you want to do some ground truthing and not necessarily take it for completely 100% face value. But in saying that, it is a really powerful tool to help us kind of get a big picture, get a macro picture of like what is happening in our community, and give us those demographic numbers that are typically based on census. She also showed, you know, those dates that this data come in can vary between, you know, present to 2010. So so yeah, it's just, you know, doing your research, you know, when you're using the tool, but you know, the fact that it is for free, and that it is, and that they're using Esri data points, which is a very, very, very expensive program to use. And the fact that this is available to community is really awesome. So, you know, yeah, it has some drawbacks, but what it provides is really, really, really cool. So I'm really grateful about that. And I think Sarah may have something to share too.
Well, I'm excited for all of you to see an example. I think when Emily started showing us examples, you know, of an area around a school, or just the area next to in the CI hub or the super fund, and we could just see so clearly, like if you look at a whole map of Portland, you could just see so clearly, you know, the issues that people are facing. So I've looked at tools before, and I'm not saying I understand completely how to use it, but really exciting. You can get it in a map format or in a graph format. I hope I'm right in saying that. You can print it, you can share it. So I think it's a wealth of information, and I'm hoping lots of people in Portland will use that when they're you know, making a presentation about communities in Portland. So I hope we can really spread the word about it. But
Yeah.
I want you to get to see what Emily showed us, because I think that's the fun part of the evening.
Thank you, guys. I know, Doug, you were here as well, if you wanted to add anything. If not, I can dive right in. It's up to you. You're on mute, Doug.
There's enough information out there, so if you go ahead into the live demo, I think that sharpens everyone's image of what you're talking about.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen again. So first of all, to get to EJ Screen, all you have to do is go to Google and type in EJ Screen EPA. It'll be the first link that pops up. So it's going to bring you to EPA's website. It has a lot of information on, you know, what is EJ Screen, understanding results, the technical information behind it. So if you ever have additional questions, this is also a resource for you. But right at the top of the slide, it's going to have this option to launch the EJ Screen tool. So we just click right there, and it's going to bring you to a map. Sometimes it loads a little slow. But so, yeah, it's going to open up to a map. And on the left side, you'll see there's 4 different tabs at the top. So we have maps, places, reports, and tools. So I'm kind of going to go into each of these tabs. And then on the right side, you can also enter in an address. So before we were looking at the Sinton School. So I'm going to pull that up again, just to give some perspective. So you can see this pink X on the map is kind of where the school is located. Am I lagging? Okay. So the first thing we can look at is these environmental justice indexes. And again, this is looking at an environmental indicator with demographic information. And at the top, I can click to compare to the US or to compare to the state. So as I mentioned, I like to compare to the state. Now we're only going to be comparing to Oregon. And we can start by looking at PM 2.5. So it's just going to map on your area the different percentiles. So again, we're comparing to the state of Oregon. So as you can see, the school looks like it's in the 70th to 80th percentile. And then right next to it is the 80th to 90th percentile. You can see like Vancouver has some elevated areas. So this is just looking at PM 2.5 compared to the demographic information. We can look at Superfund proximity. As you can see, this was brought up earlier, the areas closest to the Superfund site are not showing up as red, and that's because of the demographic information that's being pulled here. So if we want to look at just the pollution sources, we can come down here and click Superfund proximity. And as you can see, it totally changes the map because this is only looking at the environmental indicator. It's not including any of the demographic information of those areas. So that's kind of how the map changes when you toggle between the environmental justice indices and the pollution and sources. So each one of these can be mapped individually, and it can be compared to the state or the US. There's a lot of different options to look at when you're on this mapping tab. We also talked about some of those health disparities. So we can map heart disease. It'll load. Maybe it won't load. Oh, it says currently not reachable. Let's try a different one. We'll go for low life expectancy. Huh. That's funny, it was just available an hour ago. So I'm gonna type in my address again. And then I'm gonna try this again, there we go. So you can see different areas of Portland, and again, these are all in percentiles. So compared the health disparities, the climate change data, and the critical service gaps, the only option is to compare to the US. So unlike the EJ indices and the pollution, where you can compare to the state, on these you can only compare to the US. But again, it's just kind of mapping this information, so it's giving you a nice visual. We can also look at climate change data. So if you wanted to look at like wildfire risk, we're in a city, so it kind of makes sense that we're less than 50th percentile, but you can see as you move farther out, the risk becomes greater. Zoom back in. So there's a lot of information on this map tab. The next tab I'm going to move over to is the places. So there's different things you can look at. So if you're curious about EPA regulated facilities, I can click on those and you can see that all different kinds pop up. So we can click to look at our Superfund sites. So you can see those little orange boxes are kind of just like, obviously the Superfund site is bigger than that, but that's kind of where they're dropping them on the map. You can look at schools. So right now we're selected at sit in school, so you can see a little flag is going to pop up. So this is helpful if you want to see, how schools are impacted by the environment around them. There's places of worship, hospitals. So there's various different places that you can add to your map. And when you're going to, the next thing I'm going to go over is a report. So if you want to leave these layers on when you're on your report, that's something you can do. So I'll leave the schools layer on for now. So I'm going to move over to this reports tab. To me, this is the most powerful use of the tool because it's going to give you all the information I just showed you in one place. So we have different ways of selecting an area. We can drop a pin, we can draw an area, you can select a block group. So for sit in school, what I did last time was I dropped a pin and I selected a block group. And I think it was helpful to kind of see the different data that EJ Screen is going to give you. So I'm going to do that again. So the first thing I'm going to do is drop a pin. I'll call this sit in school. And I'm going to add a 1 mile buffer to the area. And then I'm going to click get printable standard report, and it's going to open a new tab. Sometimes this tab takes a few minutes to load, but once this tab is downloaded, you'll have the option to save this as a PDF so that you can have this data for later. While I'm loading that, I will also load this third option is the 2016 to 2020 ACS report. So this is going to give you some information specific about the demographics in the area. So as you can see, the population in that 1 mile buffer that I selected is 12,932. It'll give you the number of households, the average income in the area, all different kinds of information here. Okay. Here we go. Yeah, it's going to give you information about the demographics, the race, the age of people. It'll give you some information about the languages spoken. So there's a lot of powerful demographic information on this tab. And again, this is something that you can download and save. And this is all just that area within that 1 mile circle that you selected. So this is that first button that I clicked on. I'll just go back so you can see that get printable standard report. This is what was loading. So for that 1 mile buffer, up at the top, it's going to tell you the population there. So again, we saw that's 12,932. And this top table is looking at those EJ indices. Again, that's the demographic information along with each individual environmental indicator. And it's comparing the percentile to the state and the USA. So you can see here that like Superfund is elevated, the RMP facility proximity is elevated, underground storage tanks is elevated. So typically when EPA staff, when we look at these reports, we're kind of mentally flagging anything that's above the 80th percentile. That might mean that there is a community with EJ concerns there. So we kind of look more into that. And here it is in graph form. The orange is going to be compared to the state and the blue is going to be compared to the nation. It tells you that here. The second thing that it's going to give you is a map of what you had on your screen when you selected get printable standard report. So this is helpful if you decide to download this and save it. It's reminding you of that area that you had selected. It also, I think I'm a little too zoomed out, but in the at the bottom here, it says schools. So the schools should have popped up. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm too zoomed out. Then at the bottom here, this is looking at the pollution and sources by itself without that demographic information. So I know there's a lot of numbers here. Here's that percentile tab. So this is giving you that information, the percentile without the demographic information. So compared to the top, you can kind of see how the numbers change. The other thing that it's giving you here is the value, and it'll give you the units next to the pollution source. And then it's also giving you the state average. So you can see like if you're above or below the state average, if you want to get into those, more technical numbers, this is kind of where you can see comparisons. And then Scott, as I had mentioned, we don't have that like threshold of like what EPA considers, healthy or normal. We just have the state average and the percentiles here. So that's something that you would have to do follow-up research on, kind of. And then same with the socioeconomic indicators, it's giving you the state average and then this specific area. So there's a lot of information in this report. I know it can be overwhelming, especially because we also have the option to compare to the USA. There's just a lot of numbers at you. So try to like break it down, take your time processing it when you go back in here. And again, if you have questions, you can reach out to me at any time. The other thing that I mentioned that I wanted to do was, so for this report, we had drawn the 1 mile buffer around the school. So now I'm going to delete that and I'm going to select the block group instead so that we can compare how a block group, I think I did this block group last time, yeah. So we can see how the block group compares to the 1 mile buffer. So I'm going to get that printable standard report again. And it'll take a second to load again. As it's loading, I'll just mention, I know I talked about EJ grants earlier. So this is something like this tool can be used in a grant application when you're applying to kind of talk about the community that's impacted by the project you want to do. It's just a powerful tool to, you know, provide data behind what you're describing. Sometimes it's helpful in that sense. So here's our EJ screen report. You can see in this one, in the block group, that the population is only 2,118. So we're looking at a much smaller population than that 1 mile buffer. And it even tells you that input area of square miles is 0.45 compared to the last one that was 3.14. So these EJ indices at the top here are all much higher than they were when we looked at the 1 mile buffer. You can see almost all of them are elevated. Almost all of them are above that 80th percentile mark that we typically look at. So you can kind of see how sometimes, you know, EJ screen data, if you don't know what you're looking at, it can be skewed. So I typically recommend looking at these block groups because they're the smallest data set that EJ screen uses. So it's going to kind of provide you the most powerful information of that area that you're looking at. So yeah, you can just see that the percentiles here are much larger. And again, this EJ indices are looking at environmental indicators with demographic. I know it can be confusing and I'm being repetitive, but it's just a good point to throw out there. Again, here's your map. So this is showing you the block group that you selected. And these are, the block groups are predefined by the US Census. So you don't really have control, like you can't redraw a block group. You can draw your own area in EJ screen, that just wouldn't be considered a block group. And then again, down here, we have those pollution environmental indicators separate from the demographic information, giving you those percentiles, and then that value for that area compared to the state average and the national average. So this was the report tab. So yeah, you can see that there's different ways to kind of select your area when you're making these maps. And then once you do, you want to kind of click on those first or those middle two, kind of give you a lot of information. The bottom one is the CDC report, which I can pull it up. It also has different information about like health, like asthma rates, but this only looks at a county. The CDC tool does not have the capability to look at that specific area that you selected, whereas those other two does. So this is looking at the entire county. So it still has very helpful information. It's just not localized to that area that you selected, if that makes sense. So that was our third tab, our reports tab. Again, there's just other ways to select areas, but I think that the block group and the pin and the area are kind of the strongest use of the tool. And then our fourth tab, I'm just gonna delete this so you can see. You're able to save your session. So if you wanted to save your session, you can name it and then add it later. So you can click this plus button to get it back onto the map. You can measure distances. You can do a side-by-side comparison. Again, this is kind of for more advanced like GIS users if you want to look at one area and look at 2 different maps at the same time, that's an option. You can add your own shape files if you have them. You can search the Esri Geo platform if there's additional layers that you want to pull in that you know are out there. You can layer them over our maps. You can print, which means almost like take a screenshot of the area so that you save just what you're looking at right now. So there's a lot of things that you can do with EJ Screen. I think it can be a little overwhelming when you first look at it, but I would try to focus in on those report tabs because I think that they give you the most information in one place that you can save. The other thing I just want to touch on quickly, as I had mentioned earlier, if you want additional information on the layers, if you see this eye, the info on the right side next to schools, you can click on that and it's going to open another tab and it's going to give you all of the data. Let me get to the top here. So like if you're interested in the pollution and sources, like where is PM 2.5 coming from, you can kind of look at each individual thing that's mentioned in EJ Screen. And on top of that, we also have technical documentation that's really going to get into the weeds of everything. I think it's, what did we say, 150 pages. So yeah, there's a lot of information so that you can find where our data sources are coming from. We're trying to be like as transparent as possible. So we're trying to make this user friendly and hopefully this is helpful. I think that's kind of everything I wanted to show you in the tool.
North Portland Life.
Sarah just asked, I don't know if everyone could hear, if I could show North Portland life expectancy. So I'm going to go back to the health disparities and do low life expectancy. So I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see the surrounding area. That might be too much. But see, yeah, all of the areas that are flagged, those are all separate block groups. So that's why, you know, some are like the lines are by block group, if that makes sense. Did anyone in the group have anything that they wanted me to show them or map? Anything you wanted to see?
So looking at this life expectancy, so that 80 to 90,
This area is 90 to 95. Sorry, I know the color might be a little off on my screen.
And that is for the state, not national.
This is nationally. So the
This is
health
national.
disparities, the climate change data, and the critical service gaps only compare nationally. You don't have the option to select on those.
Okay. So it is national.
Yes.
So this is Scott. If I wanted to know more detailed information about, like we talked about before, what is threshold data that relates to the low life expectancy? Can you pull that up? What is available?
So yeah, you'd click on that eye again, the info on the left side, and it's going to take you back to that same tab. So then the low life expectancy data is coming from this USA LEAP program, the US Small Area Life Expectancies Estimates Project. Then you can click on this tab and it'll give you all of that like raw data on like where it's coming from, because this is not something that's measured by EPA. So we're using external, like nationally consistent data.
Sure.
So yeah, I'll always direct you to this eye at the top there because it's going to take you to that tab and then you can get farther to where you want to go through that tab.
So the low life expectancy, could you compare that? Like, could you take that data, just the percentile alone, and compare it to something that you think it might be related to?
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
That might be causal.
yeah, so what we can do is we can compare, maybe it's, air toxic cancer risk. So when it's kind of overlaid like this, it can be quite confusing to look at. So the new feature that we have is this, where is it? Tools. This side-by-side comparison. So that's going to open a new tab. And what I can do on here is pull up one, maybe. Let's see. Okay. More. No, I've never done this before, so.
Right, doing great for the live demo, right?
But so, yeah, on the left side, if we wanted to look at the air toxic cancer risk, we do that. And then on the right side, there should be a way for me to add those climate change. I mean, those. No, because that's still just the variable. I feel like I should be able to scroll down, but it's just not letting me. Anyway, I thought there was a way, but maybe there's not.
That's okay. So my thought process goes like this, that, I mean, we're a reasonably friendly audience here. And, but of course we would like to be able to know how to use this tool in a very productive way. And so that's why I kind of brought up the thought process earlier about master's degrees and people who might be using this tool, that having case studies so that people can do a variety of sophisticated types of analysis and moving them towards better and better ways to show, let's say, show a relationship. You can't, maybe not be able to show cause and effect or prove cause and effect, but you might be able to show that this has a direct relationship to this. And as the toxics go up, then you see life expectancy going down. And then proving causation is a different thing, but having that kind of different types of analysis that directly lead you to something that has persuasive argument behind it, data behind it, seems to be really powerful. And so I would strongly encourage that, to try to get different versions of analysis so that people can walk through them, like either a case study or a mini trainings, things like that. And that was why I also brought up universities, because students are constantly looking for projects, and it wouldn't be harmful to you to have free help.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen some of our EJ grantees do things similar in the past as well, with like air quality monitoring and things like that. But no, I think you raised some really good points, and I think it's no surprise that when an area has those elevated health disparities, it typically also has elevated EJ indices, because those things do typically correlate. So it would be great to have more studies out there that are kind of like showing that and proving that, kind of ground truthing the data within this tool.
Yeah, you found the word I was looking for, correlation. Yeah, that's great.
Are there any other questions or anything else anybody wanted to see in the tool? If not, I'll stop sharing and kind of open it up to any general questions about environmental justice or EJ Screen at all. Yeah, so tomorrow we're going to do a very similar training, but we're offering it as a hybrid option. So you could come do it in person, and then it's kind of helpful because you can bring your own computer and we can be over your shoulder, kind of directing you on how to do it. I learn best by doing things myself, so it depends on what kind of learner you are, but I think it's really helpful to be able to do stuff like this in person. So yeah, that's tomorrow, 6 to 7 at the BES lab next to Cathedral Park. We do have the hybrid option as well if people are interested in that, but yeah.
Well, okay. Well, Emily, thank you. Thank you so much for doing that. And I know that that was like a fire hydrant, folks. So it's a lot of information. You know, we felt like if we could just kind of get through the front door a little bit, we can get in there and then we can at least start to, you know, understand, and we can, you know, kind of go from there. So if folks are interested, I would advise everyone to come on over to the BES lab tomorrow if you are interested in wanting to know more, or if you know someone who is interested in something like this, to send them down here. You know, I mean, I didn't learn how to, I had to take a course at PSU to learn how to use these tools. So, you know, the fact that this is available for free and you don't have to pay for the data is a really great opportunity, especially if you know any high school students, some younger people too. This is a great tool for them to get into, to kind of know a little bit more about their community if they're, you know, interested in you know, just their own local community. So, you know, so I just encourage everyone to, you know, spread the word for tomorrow. We had one meeting today. We used our CAG meeting for this, and we're gonna do it again tomorrow. So we really would like for folks to take advantage of the opportunity. And we actually are thinking about possibly trying to, you know, maybe do something like this quarterly, just so that, you know, this information is there. We're trying to want to get this into community people's hands. Not everyone knows that these tools are here, and they really are good tools for you to tell your own story and not have someone else tell your story about your community, you know, to you. So that's one of those things. Were there any announcements from from folks who are online, or any additional questions or comments that folks would like to share? Okay, doesn't sound like it. So
Well,
on that
actually,
note, I think we're gonna
actually, I
call
do
the
have one. This is
evening,
Tom Crow.
the end.
Wait a second. I did have
And,
one question.
Oh, Tom, was
Yeah.
there a Tom?
Yeah, I just wanted to raise the question
Oh,
of
yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure,
for
sure.
comparison between different time zones. So can we go back in terms of the data? How far back in terms of a time series does the data go, especially for the pollution, or is it a one-time shot?
I'm not clear what you mean on time zones.
Time series. So you have historical data, current data, etc. So the pollution count was such on 2020. What was it in 2010? And then you compare the changes over time between on different pollution or whatever other criteria you want to use.
Yeah, that's actually really good feedback. I think that should consider showing, because, you know, the ultimate goal of the EPA is to protect environmental, you know, and health, and protect the environment and health. So if we could show in that tool how, you know, air quality is improving and water quality is improving, I think that would be really powerful and maybe less scary than just looking at, you know, a map where everything's bright red and, you know, so I think that's actually really great feedback, and I will bring that back to headquarters because we, like I mentioned, we update the tool annually. So yeah, that would be great to have.
Well, because it's important also to show what has been the past, you know, it wasn't this way before, what's happened. And then also if there has been progress, to show you, you know, what's been the impact of whatever policy changes or other program changes that are made. So that's why it was of interest to time series type thing.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. Yeah. Sorry, we're having hybrid technical difficulties. But yeah, no, that's really good to be able to see. So I will bring that back. Thank you.
Going to this time system around this part of the state, we have had a number of mills that were very big polluters, 1920, 1910, 1940. Now they're non-existent. Do we have any data in this database that goes that far back?
Sorry, can you repeat that? We were kind of switching mics here.
Okay. In this area of Oregon, we've had a number of big mills that were very big polluters going back to 1910, 1920, 1940. And these mills are non-existent now as the paper industry particularly has changed. How far does this data go back? And does it capture when some of these areas were very much polluting generators, or is it just what's in the last few years?
So EJ Screen is just looking at the current data. Like I mentioned, it is a screening tool. So yeah, I encourage folks to continue to ground truth things. And when we look at environmental justice, we are considering that historical context and how communities have been disproportionately impacted in the past, but that's not displayed in EJ Screen, but it is something that we consider at EPA.
Because again, in some of our small areas where I'm particularly interested, the mills did a lot of pollution. There's a lot in the ground and they're no longer there.
Right.
That is
Yeah.
very concerning for us, especially if we want to go fishing or clean up the area.
Yeah, I think that EJ Screen has like the present data set of what's in the area, but not the history or the past or anything like that. So that's something that we could look at incorporating.
Okay, were there any other questions or comments that folks would be interested in sharing, or? Here's your chance. Okay, well then with that, then we're gonna call it an evening. And thanks so much for taking time out of your day, out of your busy Wednesday to join us this evening. We really appreciate it, and hope that maybe you can, if you can make it, if you're interested and you wanna know more about this tool, come on down tomorrow at between 6 and 7. We'll try to have, some snacks. We won't have a full meal, a whole dinner, but we'll have some snacks and something hot to drink for sure. With that, we will see you hopefully tomorrow or next month at the Collaborative. And keep an eye out for emails and updates that's happening on the river from the CAG and from EPA. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good night.